walked along, he saw a man born blind. And his disciples said to him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?"
Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him."
And then Jesus spat on the ground, and he made mud. And he took the mud and he spread it on the man's eyes, saying, "Go to the pool of Siloam and wash." And so the man went and he washed, and he came back able to see.
Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened the man's eyes. So the Pharisees began to ask the man how it was that he had received his sight. The man said, "Well, put some mud on my eyes and then I washed and now I see."
And then the Pharisees said, "You know, this Jesus is not from God, for he did not observe the Sabbath." But then there were others of them who said, "But if he's a sinner, how could he perform such signs?" And they were divided.
Well, now the Pharisees would not believe until they called the man's parents and asked them, "Well, we know that this is our son. And we know also that he was born blind. But what we do not know is how it is that now he can see, and nor do we know who it is who opened his eyes." Why don't you just ask him? He's old enough. He can speak up for himself.
Now they said this because they were afraid of the Jews, because the Jews had already agreed that anyone who proclaimed Jesus as Messiah would be turned out of the synagogue.
So for a second time, the Pharisees called the man and said to him, "This Jesus is a sinner." And the man said, "I don't know whether he's a sinner, but I do know, though I was blind, now I see." And the Pharisees said, "How did he open your eyes?"
"Why are you asking me again?" he said. I already told you, and you would not listen. "Do you want to become his disciples?" Oh. Well, then they reviled him. "You are his disciple," they said. "We are disciples of Moses, for we know that God has spoken through to Moses. But as for this Jesus, we don't know where he came from."
"Well, here's an amazing thing," said the man. "You don't even know where he came from, yet he opened my eyes. I'll tell you, never since the world began has there been anyone who could open the eyes of a person who was born blind. I tell you, if this man were not from God, well, he could do nothing."
Then the Pharisees threw him out, saying, "You were born blind. You were born completely in sin, and now are you trying to teach us?" Now Jesus heard that the man he had cured had been driven out of the synagogue, and so he found him, and he said, "Do you believe in the Messiah?"
"Sir, who is he? Please tell me so that I may believe in him." And then Jesus said, "You already know him. In fact, you are speaking with him right now." And the man fell down before Jesus, worshiping him and saying, "Oh Lord, Lord, I believe."
And Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who are blind might see, and those who see may become blind." Now there were some Pharisees nearby who heard him, and they said, "So now we are blind, are we?"
And Jesus said, "Well, if you were blind, you would not be guilty. But since you say, 'I see,' well, your guilt remains." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Here we have John the poet, not the historian, telling another story about Jesus. Tune your heart to his metaphors, because this gospel is laden with non-literal language. When wine runs dry at a wedding, Jesus turns jars of water into the finest wine they've ever tasted. The fact that he does not produce simply 12 bottles of wine, but rather 150 gallons, is a tip-off that this gospel is being written by someone who uses wine as a symbol, not a literal object. When Jesus tells Nicodemus he must be born again, Nicodemus scratches his head. How can I re-enter my mother's womb? And Jesus smacks his head. He's not talking about a physical second birth. He's talking about a spiritual rebirth. When Jesus encounters the Samaritan woman at the well, he talks about living water, and she thinks he's talking about a spring that flows continuously. But he's talking not in a literal way, but rather he's talking about the life-giving Spirit of God when he talks about living water. Well, if we read today's story literally, we reduce it to a tale about Jesus healing someone who was blind. Certainly an inspiring story about the miraculous gifts of Jesus, but a distant story. One that has little to do with us and life in the 21st century. However, if we awaken to the fact that blindness is being used in more than a literal sense, we're drawn into reflecting on how someone who possesses perfect 20/20 vision can still be stumbling around in the dark. Jesus and his disciples are walking along when they run upon this man who has been blind since birth. The disciples do not speak to the man. They do not say, "Is there some way we can help you?" Instead, they use him as an object for their theology. Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Despite the book of Job, many in the ancient world believed that suffering was the result of punishment by God. If your crops failed, if you broke your leg, it must be God punishing you for your sins. If your harvest was abundant, if your health was robust, well, then God must be rewarding you for your virtue. Jesus moves to quash such musing. No one's sin caused his blindness, but his plight could be an opportunity for God's works to be revealed through him. Then Jesus does what our mothers instructed us never to do. He spits. He spits on the ground and uses his saliva to turn the dirt into mud. He makes a couple of miniature mud pies and then splats them on the man's face. Then he tells the man to go to the pool of Siloam and wash off the mud. The man does as he is told, and he acquires something he's never had before: his vision. It's at this point that the author of this story disappoints me. A man has been blind all his life, and suddenly he sees, and the author fails to provide one detail of the man's reaction. I can picture this man with saucer-sized eyes, leaping around, looking at the sky, being dazzled by it. Look at those gorgeous trees. Look at all the vivid colors. The man's able to see birds soaring in an immense sky that goes clear to the horizon. Able to see children running around playing with each other. Able to look into the eyes of his mother and father for the first time. This man no longer needs anyone to guide his steps. He can see the path. He's always loved the sweet taste of grapes. Now he is dazzled by an immense hillside covered by a vineyard. A man who had been blind since birth can now see. What a miracle. Someone should throw a celebration for the whole village. However, the Pharisees squash any possibility of a party. They shout, "This is a catastrophe." Jesus healed the man on the Sabbath, a clear violation of Section 4, Paragraph 3, do not work on the Sabbath. The religious leaders began peppering the man with questions. Who did this? How did he do it? What was this man doing working on the Sabbath? Has he no respect for the law? The man replies very simply. He put mud on my eyes. I washed it off, and now I can see. The Pharisees argue among themselves. Then they demand that his parents be hauled in for questioning. The parents fear getting on the wrong side of the Pharisees because the Pharisees can have them evicted from the synagogue. So when questioned, they say, well, he's an adult, ask him. The Pharisees drag the man back in and tell the man that Jesus is a sinner. The man replies, all I know is I was blind, and now I see. Rather than rejoicing with the man, rather than saying, thanks be to God, the Pharisees are incensed. Why? Because they did not perform the miracle. They are more concerned with who gets the credit than the miracle itself. Our passage intends to elicit a question from us. Who is really blind here? Is it the man who was physically blind? Or is it the Pharisees who are so concerned about being outshone that they are blind to who Jesus is? Here's something that happens all too frequently at our house. I open the refrigerator door. I look for something in particular, cheese, yogurt, whatever. And I say to Camilla in the other room, are we out? She says, no, it's there. I think to myself, no way. I have just scoured all the shelves. It can't be there. Okay, I'll look a second. There it is. About that time, Camilla wanders into the kitchen, sees me with what I thought was lost, but now is found, and with a twinkle in her eye says, way to go, you found it. Sometimes I think I see everything in front of my eyes. But then I take a second look, and with a slightly changed perspective, I see something that I'd missed. Does that ever happen to you? What do you see and what do you miss? Where are you perceptive? And where are you blind? I've often been blind to the cultural privileges I have because I'm a white, middle-class male. I remember being surprised when I was in high school when a friend of mine who came from a low-income household said he wasn't going to college. I thought everybody went from high school to college. It was just the natural flow. But his father had trampled his ambition, saying, oh, now you think you're getting smarter than I am. I remember my surprise when I learned that the only African-American high school in our city that just dominated football and basketball had no swim team. And then I found out it was the only public school that did not have a pool. I remember my eyes being opened when I learned that women who were just a few years older than I found that they were led to believe that they only had 4 career opportunities before them: teacher, secretary, nurse, flight attendant. I remember my eyes opening a few years ago when I went to Israel and saw Palestinians needlessly hassled by the soldiers at the checkpoints. I saw their olive trees being burned, their livelihoods lost. They're driven off their land, their houses are bulldozed to make more room for settlements. We think of ourselves as informed and perceptive, and it surprises us when we discover that we have been blind to injustice. Until some person or some new insight opens our eyes. The Pharisees were driven by a need to control the situation and dictate the terms. Thus, they were blind to the miracle in their midst and the Messiah who could open the door to new possibilities of rich and abundant ways of living. The eyes through which we see create the world in which we live. If our thoughts are clouded with suspicion and fear, we will observe a threatening and dangerous world. If our minds are infused with love and gratitude, we will perceive beauty and joy. Jesus can restore your sight. The more you seek the way of Jesus, what he taught and how he lived, the clearer your vision becomes. The more you squint to see the image of God in others, the brighter your world becomes. God wants us to envision the world as it can be. A place where broken relationships are reconciled. Where people seek not self-interest, but the common good. Where each of us wants for the other the same good we want for ourselves. Where cruelty is overwhelmed by compassion and greed overrun by generosity. Where strangers become friends and where dead ends suddenly become pathways to new possibilities. Just yesterday, I caught a glimpse of the kingdom of God in our meeting room. 3 Christians from Westminster, a few Jews from Congregation Beth Shalom, threw a surprise birthday party for the mother of our Muslim refugee family. Not only was it a surprise because Mariam did not know we were going to celebrate her birthday, but because she has never had a birthday party. Did you know they don't recognize birthdays in Afghanistan? Well, we had ice cream and a cake covered with candles. We had balloons, cards, presents, and those cheesy cardboard birthday hats. You never had a birthday before? Welcome to the USA. Instead of barriers, there were bonds between people from 3 different faiths. There were outstretched arms that said, "You're not strangers. You're our friends. We want to help you get back on your feet." The eyes through which you see create the world in which you live. Will you let Jesus touch your eyes?